Please welcome. Thank you, sir. Next, I would like to call upon His Excellency Shaida Muhammad Abdali. He has been here in the pre-tea session also. Welcome, sir. Please come on the dais. I have the pleasure of calling upon Asaduddin Owaisi Sahab, who is a barrister who did his law from the United Kingdom. He's a three-time parliamentarian from Hyderabad and a very popular face on the television for very pleasant and unpleasant ideology he has, nevertheless. And I'm sure he's going to enlighten us with his opinion today. Next, I'd like to call upon Mr. Prabhu Rao. Mrs. Prabhu Rao, I'm sorry, I seek pardon. Mrs. Prabhu Rao, Senior Fellow at the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi. Mrs. Prabhu, please come on, please. Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma was here in the pre-tea session, but we didn't get to hear from him. I'm sure he's going to enlighten us with his expert opinion and whatever he has to say. Next, I'd like to call upon Professor Rakesh Rajgopalan. I hope he's here. Rajesh, I'm sorry, that's what I've got here. I'm sorry. These small glitches do happen in a conference like this. I seek your pardon for that. I hope Captain Alok Bansal is here. Could we have him on the stage, please? And last but not the least for this session, I would like to call upon Simi Anderson, who's an activist with the International Human Rights Organization. I'm sure Mr. Shashank will take over and preside for this session, and I'm sure you have the itinerary with you to take on the session. And you all will definitely, these are all very tall faces for their contribution in their respective fields of work, and that they have a large standing experience behind them, and I'm sure they have a lot to speak about the terrorism, anti-terrorism on this occasion. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
I welcome all my co-panelists for this session, and I wish to welcome all the members in the auditorium. I'm sure that this is going to be an interesting session. This is a very special occasion marking the 26/11 9th anniversary. Very sad occasion, but at the same time has to show our determination that whatever we have to strengthen our resolve to make sure that it does not happen again, and whatever weaknesses are there, we take care of them. This session we will be taking up the global and regional responses to terrorism. Very briefly, I would just say that yes, we have tried, the countries in South Asia, they have come together several times in various forums. So not just the, let's say, bilaterally, but in regional, sub-regional framework, we have tried to get together to see that terrorism is contained. And we have been successful to some extent, because terrorism is something where it's not a question of getting 75% marks for distinction. You really have to get 100% marks. And one mark less means one terrorist incident, which may lead to a large number of casualties or small number. So therefore we have to keep this in mind, that in each individual organization, however small, even in a family setup, we have to prepare ourselves for this. And as you move away from the family setting to the community setting, sub-regional setting within the country, national setting, etc. So we have to make sure that this happens, and GCTC is playing a very important role by bringing people together, both young people as well as those who have experience in different aspects of life, civil services, military, police, intelligence, other services and think tanks, activists. So we have a very good possibility that without changing our system of governance from democracy to something else, we try to take care of these weaknesses so that terrorist incidents can be contained, or if they are not contained, at least their impact can be minimized and action taken against people immediately. And in case we can change the mindset to an extent that yes, terrorism is not necessary, people feel more happy. So I remember the Bhutanese case where the gross national happiness has been made an index. And in many other UN contexts, I think with the physical quality of life or many other kind of indices have been developed in order to find out that the mind should be at peace. Then you don't get into any of these issues. In India, of course, we have the old tradition where you call a person with Satchitanand. That is, if your mind, your conscience is stable, peaceful, then I think then we can be at peace with ourselves and peace with the society and people around us. I hope we can achieve that ideal, but so long as we do not achieve the ideal, we have to carry on and keep on discussing, keep on identifying new techniques to deal with these issues. My first speaker on my panel I find is His Excellency Shahida Muhammad Afdali, Ambassador of Afghanistan. He has deep experience of both India. He has a PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University. At the same time, he has also been the Deputy National Security Advisor in Afghanistan. So we don't have any time limit for excellencies. So you have your time, sir, whatever time you want to speak. I think yes, please.
A very good morning, Mr. Shashank, distinguished panelists on the dais, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. As you all know, in Delhi we hardly get time, but especially knowing of this particular conference on a particular issue in the Senate, there was no point that I should not be here today to share the pain of the Afghan people inflicted as a result of the 26/11. Afghanistan shared the pain with you because we go through the same situation almost on daily basis. And thank you, the GCTC, for the organization and the warm welcome. Let me, before I go to the particular subject, have a brief overview of the global and regional situation which has an impact on the very topic that we are talking about, which is the global uncertainty today, which is the international relationships in transition, our relations being realigned. Some call it a world moving towards multipolarity, some call it the new normal, and some call it the new great game. Economically speaking, the economic structure of the world is becoming outdated and not responding to the needs of the current. The South Asia region, more importantly, despite having tremendous potential, remains to be the least connected. State sponsorship of terrorism prevails. Fatigue and reluctance towards enhancing common regional agenda becomes the biggest threat to our common peace, prosperity, and development. The threats of terrorism, much bigger than the years before. The distinction between bad and good terrorists continue to exist. More importantly, the continued safe sanctuaries of terrorism we all witness today. Violent extremism, criminal economy, and once again let me repeat the third element, which is the most crucial one, the state sponsorship of terrorism, are the critical actors operating in our region. And all of these have symbiotic relationship with one another. As a result, we see what we see today. And as you all know, it is not about one particular country. And it's also not about one particular region. It is a global phenomenon. Yes, some countries may be facing more challenges and more problems than the others, but ultimately the phenomena is a global phenomenon. Now coming to the particular subject that we are talking, what is our response in the context of Afghanistan? We have response at three levels: national, international, and regional. Nationally, Afghanistan is, as you all know, in the transition process. Afghanistan, after 14 years of effort to rebuild its institutions, its army and the police, is taking over the responsibility of its own security forces, its security and its own security forces. Our forces are fighting a global problem in Afghanistan. And we are fighting on behalf of the region and the globe in Afghanistan against a phenomenon that I just described. To go against the phenomena, Afghanistan has a 4-year plan. A plan to rebuild its security forces, to have a capable army and the police and the air force. And that 4-year plan is in the process right now, supported by NATO countries and allies around the world, including India and the US in particular. In the last few years, our forces have had great successes. Many talk about the challenges that we faced in the last 2 years, but these problems are naturally because of Afghanistan's current state of ability and the strength. The responsibility going to the Afghan security forces from more than 40 countries present in Afghanistan after 2001, and then withdrawing and leaving the responsibility to the Afghan security forces. So it's natural when you have over 100,000 foreign troops leaving the country and leaving the responsibility to the Afghan security forces who are not capable enough to challenge. You will see what we see today in Afghanistan. But luckily, our forces were successful in countering the problem and the threat to a level that without or except one particular issue last year, the fall of Kunduz province, no other incident of this nature has occurred. This itself shows the strength and the success of the Afghan security forces after the completion of the transition process in Afghanistan. While dealing with the problem militarily, we also deal with the problem politically. We have a process called the peace process. Afghanistan, while any other country will have the right to defend itself against any foreign aggression militarily, at the same time, as a principle, we also advanced a political process in coordination with our global and regional partners, and we call it the peace process. Afghanistan continues put forward the peace process, in other words, to find a political solution to the problem, because we believe it is the politics that is behind what we see in our countries, in our region. In our peace process, we've had some successes. The Hizb Islamic group, now part of the political process in Afghanistan, is the success of the political process that Afghanistan had. This means the determination of Afghanistan in the context of the peace process that we have always discussed and the belief that we have in it. So we have had some successes, but definitely we have to go a long way before we complete our journey to find a political solution to the problem. But as you all know, this is not an Afghan-grown phenomena. This is a phenomena imposed on our people from the 1990s, when the Taliban, when the so-called Taliban, I would call it, was emerged in Afghanistan, till today, the phenomena has external links with networks, with the safe sanctuaries, with the financial support from outside, and more specifically from Pakistan. So we continue to engage our neighboring countries, mainly Pakistan, to resolve the problem politically. But clearly, Afghanistan has its conditions. Renounce violence, accept the Afghan constitution, they're most welcome to join the political process. But the reason why we have not succeeded yet is the lack of the political will. And we hope that countries in this region, particularly Pakistan, will recognize that it is not only going to be Afghanistan and any other country, but themselves paying the price for what is being grown, for what is being supported today in Pakistan. And we all also see same incidents. If we not see the same level of incidents, we also see the incidents in Pakistan because of terrorism and the terrorist groups who are going against their property, their people, and we hope that they will recognize the fact that it is not posing a challenge eventually to one particular nation. It will be challenging their own people as well, and their state as well. 2017 was definitely a worse year compared to the years before, but clearly our forces are determined to take on them, and they are succeeding in stopping them from whatever objectives they have, which is to see the fall of the state and to see the fall of the provinces, which I gave one example last year, but that was not repeated because of the determination and the readiness of our security forces in Afghanistan. But frankly speaking, as of now, we have seen no change in the behavior from Pakistan. Despite our efforts in the last many, many years and the global response to terrorism, we have seen no change as of now. And we look forward to see a change so that we have an end to a common problem. Internationally, in the last 15 years, we, Afghanistan, together with friendly countries like India, had always raised our voice that this is a phenomena which has state support, which has financial support, which has safe havens. Unfortunately, our voice was not being heard. But today things have changed, luckily. At least the recognition of the problem that this is not an Afghan-owned problem, or this is not an Afghan-grown problem. Today there is a recognition that this is a problem beyond Afghanistan and that has to be solved. And that's why you have been witness to the new US policy for Afghanistan and South Asia, which focuses on Pakistan in terms of the cooperation, the assistance that they should be extending to all our countries in the region and the globe in order to put an end to the use of terrorism and to the spread of terrorism in our region. And this is an efficient response if we implement it, practically speaking. When we hear of the safe sanctuaries, when we hear of the US policy for South Asia and Afghanistan, in partnership with India, there is a need for an implementation mechanism that puts us in action, not only to talk about the problem. And this policy has three important dimensions. One, to stand our commitment to Afghanistan without any specific timeline. This is condition-based approach. And this is exactly what we have been lobbying all over the world, that this is a problem that must be finished to the end, not to put it specific deadlines or timelines, and that was exactly what was the case before. And the terrorists would always buy time. They would always wait us out, and they did in the last many, many years. This new policy is based on the failure and on the less impact of the policies in the past. Today we have a policy from the US that talks about conditions, not dates, and that talks about long-term commitment to Afghanistan. The second dimension, or the second element of this strategy, is to fight terrorism in the safe sanctuaries, not in Afghanistan, because Afghanistan does not produce terrorism. Afghanistan is the victim of terrorism as any other country, particularly India. Third, the role of India in this new US policy, to play a role in Afghanistan, especially in the context of development and economic assistance. But as I said earlier, we speak of policy as of now. We have to turn this policy into an action or into an implementation that takes us towards results. So we have to synchronize our efforts globally, regionally, and nationally. And the lack of unity in the last many years resulted in what unfortunately we see a much more insecure world. Here, this policy again is sometimes misinterpreted. Some talk about this policy as a policy of the three countries. That is not the case. This policy is for South Asia. We speak of a problem that is right now prevalent in this particular region and grown in this particular region. Therefore, it calls on three main stakeholders. US in partnership with India to solve the problem in Afghanistan. But that does not mean that we exclude other countries in this region or beyond. It is also talking about a call on Pakistan to be equally partner as it calls on India in the fight against terrorism. And we hope that Pakistan will become an equal partner, like a partner that we have in India, to fight against terrorism sincerely. And at the same time, it calls upon everyone else in the region to help the South Asia policy towards success. So we hope that all of us, as a response to the problem of terrorism, unite regionally and make South Asia policy a success, because this is the first time, as per my own experience in the last 15 years, a policy with such clear benchmarks, with clear goals. And I think there is a need now to help and unite all of us in the region to make this policy a success. But at the same time, unfortunately, because of the misinterpretation of this policy, there is sign of some countries trying to realign, some countries to try perhaps intentionally to misinterpret and misguide countries and people in this region, which is to say that this policy is against this particular country or that particular country. And that is not the case. We hope that we will be able to communicate properly to everyone in this region that this is for the safety, security, and prosperity of the whole region and beyond. So we have to prevent the thinking which drives towards creating a bloc in this region to divide countries, or to call for another type of Cold War or a new great game that we speak of. This should not become a great game, but this should become a great game of win-win approaches, which will bring all of us in the region and the globe to find an effective solution. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Abdali, thank you very much indeed. And what you have said is extremely important. I think India, with its partnership on economic and social development, infrastructure connectivity within Afghanistan has been able to do something. I am very happy to see my friend Ambassador K.V. Rajan, in whose time this North-South corridor was started and then forgotten for a long time. But because of Afghanistan's partnership, now it has become a trilateral partnership. Afghanistan, Iran and India. So therefore, despite sanctions on Iran on many other grounds, the connectivity for economic and social development in Afghanistan has been approved by the world members, and it's going very well. I think the first shipload of food assistance from India has already reached Afghanistan, has been very much welcomed there, and many more ships with that assistance and many other things will be going there. I mean, as Ambassador said, Pakistan has to be brought along with us in this regional commitment to fight against terrorism. For the time being, they are behaving like little spoiled children, that they were able to get about $25 billion by saying that they can get strategic depth in Afghanistan and at the same time meet the objectives of America in the region, which they were doing completely to the contrary. So they became major non-NATO ally. So I think they have to be given a very clear cut. So this is one indication of India and Afghanistan being brought in this South Asian counter-terrorism approach. And the other one would be that if this major non-NATO ally status, which is under consideration, is removed. So I think then perhaps there would be more balance, that yes, we have to find a South Asian solution, an Asian solution to the problems, not look from the point of view of being somebody's proxy only and taking them also for a ride. So I'm very glad that Ambassador spoke to us so frankly and with very great vision. Now I would request our Honorable Member of Parliament Asaduddin Owaisi Saab to talk to us.
Thank you, Mr. Shashank, Chairman, His Excellency, the Ambassador of Afghanistan, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. On 8th of November 2016, the Prime Minister had said that the demonetization exercise was decisive war against black money, corruption and terrorism. The then Defense Minister claimed multiple times that demonetization has brought an end to terror. And also the present MOS Home, Kiran Rijiju, has claimed that the insurgent groups in Northeast, the Maoist and terror groups in Kashmir have suffered losses around 800 crores. Now, in my opinion, ending terrorism through demonetization remains only a political slogan than a ground reality. The first claim was made in a question in Parliament, in a written reply in Parliament, wherein the Minister said that there was significant impact on terrorism due to demonetization. However, in the same reply, the data provided by the NCRB relating to Indian currency notes seized in J&K after demonetization from 9/11/2016 to 14/7/2017, only an amount of 2.60 lakh was shown. Furthermore, the data reveals that the already fake rupees 2000 rupee note and new 500 notes were in use and they were also recovered. Now, according to Mr. Raghuraman, the founding CEO of NatGrid, he has said terror funding can be divided into three categories. One, tactical terror financing is the money needed for carrying out specific attacks. Demonetization is unlikely to affect this segment of terror funding as the money required for such operations is insignificant and can be funded by legal resources. Second, operational terror financing, it pertains to ISI's low-intensity campaign against India, famously known as 1,000-cut strategy. For this, all it needs is to arm a few hundred terrorists with explosive, cheap assault rifles and communication equipment. The best example that I can give is the 18 September attack in Uri, which was carried by 4 terrorists using AK-47 rifles, grenade launchers, and here again, given the negligible cost involved, demonetization will have a limited impact. Perhaps the strongest argument in favor of demonetization is the supposed impact on counterfeit currency, infused into India to undermine its economy and fund terrorism. And as per Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata, rupees 70 crore in fake notes are injected in Indian economy every year. Now, official data reveals that 250 of every 1 million notes are counterfeit. Pakistan has been producing FICN using an elaborate system comprising banks and couriers. Through its government press in Punjab and Balochistan province, it is able to print money and fund its terror activities in Kashmir and rest of India. And the NIA has busted this multiple FICN rackets with clear evidence of involvement in Pakistan. However, in this case too, demonetization has a limited impact as a temporary relief, even with the so-called newer security features. Pakistan may well in future be able to make counterfeit notes in the same manner. Further, even if elimination of FICN was the main objective, it does not make sense to introduce a new 2000 rupees note as higher denomination of currency. It only helps in easing counterfeiting in the future. Now, the South Asian Terrorism Portal data shows us that in 2017, there have been 44 major terrorism incidents in J&K. As a result, 54 civilians, 74 army personnel have lost their lives in J&K. 180 terrorists have been neutralized. Out of that, 88 have been from our neighboring country, Pakistan. Hence, it can be safely concluded that even the effect of demonetization on limiting the financial capability of terror outfits has at best been limited and unsubstantiated empirically. Now, the second assertion about to cashless society or a cashless economy. In November 2014, CNBC conducted a survey of the top 10 cashless societies. It found Belgium to be the world's top cashless society, with 93% non-cash consumer payments and 83% debit card. It had two worst terrorist incidents in June and August. France was second. France had another attack. Then Canada, UK, Sweden, Australia, Holland, US. Nowadays we are seeing every month in US what's happening over there. Germany and South Korea. Unfortunately, Belgium and France, again, were the worst victims of these indigenous and transborder terrorism. Demonetization, however, will also exacerbate a new challenge as India will be nudged towards a cashless economy. This entails a far higher reliance on digital and plastic money. In October, SBI, HDFC, ICICI, Yes Bank and Axis Bank were some of the many banks hit by a major ATM hack that comprised 3.2 million debit cards. Now, even the first world countries which are decades ahead in of cyber security awareness, infrastructure and research funding, we are still struggling to find to fend off the cyber threats. The FATF, the intergovernmental body set up to combat money laundering and terrorist financing, has already warned against the threat of terrorism funding raised online. Now, this is the most important part. The most terrorist funding abuse are online, which suggests a high level of confidentiality and opportunity to distant account management. Members of terrorist networks, they use these payments in the name of third parties. They frequently use online payments. Due to this straightforward registration process, and relatively high level of anonymity is created. And then also we have seen how Bitcoins is being used nowadays. So virtual currencies such as Bitcoins are representing great opportunity for financial innovation, have attracted the attention of various criminal groups and may pose a risk of terrorist funding. This technology allows for enormous transfer of funds internationally, and while the original purchase of currency may be visible, all falling transfers of virtual currency are difficult to detect. In 2015, one Ali Shukri Amin, a US citizen, was arrested for conspiring to provide material support to ISIS, and he was using his Twitter account to conduct conversations. In such a scenario, a premature rush towards a cashless digital system without adequate legal protection may have negative repercussions. Thirdly, demonetization policy assumes that money enters the country through illegal or hawala way. Now, according to Vapala Balachandran, terrorists seldom use tax dodgers or hawala because they are known to the local law enforcement agencies, and black money is not preferred to do such an operation because it does not satisfy the criteria of volume, risk, convenience, simplicity, cost, and etc. Additionally, terrorists do not do their funding from same country. So a legal facade is created, a proper cover is used by charities, personal bank accounts to aid in bank frauds. So what matters more than a currency crackdown is a proper counter-terrorism measure. A similar assessment has been made by the US Treasury Department's risk assessment report is there, wherein they themselves find very difficult to detect terror financing through legal channels, because the report says it's an extremely tough endeavor. In India, such centralized monitoring is rendered difficult with structural inadequacy and bureaucratic elasticity to keep pace with innovative terrorism. Our counter-terrorism machineries are under 29 state governments, and the NIA has not expanded to take over a countrywide mandate. That is why we had to be alerted by British Channel 4 to locate the Shami witness in December 2014. And the last 2 points is the inefficiency of demonetization to combat terrorism. First, demonetization does not in any way target the income generation methods employed by terrorists. Narco trade networks, for example, have been suspected to aid terrorists entering India. The good example which I can give is Gurdaspur terror attack and Pathankot terror attack. There were suspicion of drug cartels in India aiding terrorists from Pakistan. Second, the landscape of terrorism and terror tactics have changed globally, as can be witnessed from experience of both US and Western Europe over the last few years. There are now more incidents of lone wolf attacks. These attacks prove that terrorists no longer rely on large organization, big funding. You just need some self-radicalized mad people who can ram a truck into a crowd of people, or take some machete and start stabbing people. And this has become the norm now. So policy like demonetization does not work to address such shifts in terrorism globally. And then there was a talk of how the Northeast people, all this area, we don't see them paying taxes. They have been deposited. The left-wing extortion they have used in 1,000 Jandan accounts. The Kashmiri separatists, it did hurt them, but it's not in cash, it's immovable property. So all in all, I feel demonetization has not really stopped or put a brake on terrorism. Thank you.
Thank you, Oasis sir. I think there might be some queries later on, but you have really pointed out that before we move into a digitized economy, it will be important to be cautious and move towards that with such a sense of training of all the agencies and the mindset of the ordinary people also being used. Now I think some of the other aspects which will be from the strengthening the intelligence would be given by Dr. Prabharao, Senior Fellow from ITSA.
South Asia, I think one analogy that always works is that of cricket. So I'm glad to say that the shine has been taken off the ball, as in my case, since the speakers before me have said so many things which I had planned to say. So now I think I can just start off absolutely on the subject in hand, on what we could do to improve intelligence preparedness for something like a 26/11 attack or other attacks. So for that, I'd just like to very briefly dwell upon the kind of threats that we are facing today. And that would give us perhaps a framework on how we need to gear up our intelligence. Security has never been more insecure than as of now. Bin Laden is dead. Whether Baghdadi is dead or not is somewhat immaterial, because what they have all done is to create so many sleeper cells, so many nodes of radicalization, that it has created sectarian divisions within the Middle East, which have had their reverberations globally, and conditions now worldwide are worse than when, say, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi started the AQI, which became the ISIS. So the same conditions are there. The same sleeper cells are there. The same dichotomy between the people and the governments are there. So our fear is that Terrorism 2.0 is on the anvil. There is a lot of talk both from the last audio message that came from Zarqawi and from the new youth icon of the Al-Qaeda, that is Hamza bin Laden, that that there should be a kind of unification of terrorist forces. Now, this is a matter of great significance for us. If we talk about unification of terrorist forces, we are seeing that between the Al-Qaeda and the ISIS, there's very little difference in their theological underpinnings, which I'm sure Ambassador Abdali would also be able to talk about. So we see then that there may be a unification of forces within South Asia as well. We are very scared now in South Asia, because this is a problem that we need to face, that if area is going to shrink within Syria and Iraq, there may be a kind of backflow of terrorists into the AFPAC region with its implications on India. This is something that the Afghan security forces have already warned us about. We know the numbers that have come from Pakistan. We know that there have been Pakistani bomb makers and terrorists who have shown their imprints in the Paris attack, in the Brussels attack, in other attacks in Westminster. So we are certainly very worried about the resonance that can happen in our country. Now, given this, we have our problem with our friendly neighbor. Ambassador Abdali has given a very evocative description about their activities. In a very friendly neighbor who tends to use religion as a foreign policy initiative. Well, their foreign policy initiatives onto various religious claims. This has had a blowback on Pakistan as well. Now, if you look at the TV news in Pakistan for the past 3 days, you have the country being held to ransom over an issue of asking for right-wing extremists asking the law minister to resign over an issue of not saying that Muhammad is the last prophet in some legal tender which had been put up into the parliament. Now this, the blasphemy law, which is continuing to flourish in Pakistan. Now this is the kind of situation that is developing over there. When you try to use radicalization as a weapon in say, Afghanistan or in India, the blowback is very much there on Pakistan. And this is what we are facing, and we need to face, when we are talking about what steps we need to take to counter something like 2611, we need to face the fact that now you have a Pakistan which is very weak, which is facing a number of internal turmoils, which has become, unfortunately, more radicalized than when 2611 happened, which has so much hostage to the right-wing forces that despite international opprobrium, they have to let Hafiz Saeb out, despite obviously facing the kind of problems that they are facing internally. They have to permit Hafiz Saeb to try and get into the political mainstream through the Majlis party or something of that kind. Despite public opprobrium, despite problems with Iran, there are issues that are being created in Sistan, Balochistan, in order to see that the Chabahar to Nimrod's route is not going to be effective. So these are the issues that we are going to face. So to come down to the ray of the matter, what do we need to do? A number of people have spoken about intelligence failure. Intelligence is not a universal placebo that you can kind of use. It's not a magic pill, it's not a silver bullet that you can use to get information about everything. That simply does not happen. So yes, in terms of developing intelligence capabilities, we have a long way to go, as has most countries. One of the major things would be something as simple as language training. We all know that when 9/11 happened, Germany had all the files of many of the hijackers, but they did not have the time, they did not have the personnel to identify and to actually translate them. We also do have the problem of Arabic. We also, to some extent, have the problem of particular dialects of Baloch, particular ways of talking, and we do have this which we need to improve upon. We need to, needless to say, improve upon getting a metadata system. However, a metadata system alone does not seem to be enough, because what we are seeing is that the metadata systems have not worked in the case of the US, have not worked in the case of Paris and Brussels and so on. Now, one interesting thing is that we find that we are always somewhat a little behind the terrorists as far as technology goes and technical innovations go. We were behind the terrorists in understanding how important social media like Telegram was, because it had complete encryption. But after Paris, after Brussels, and in our case after Pathankot, when the servers in Telegram were asked to give up their data for investigation, we have seen that the terrorists are now using different forms of communication which are becoming very, very untraceable. One of the points that we have seen is that we have seen that they are using something called the Zero Net, which is like a mobile app, like a social app using the Tor principle, which means it goes through truncated servers. Now, it is naturally very, very difficult to manage to see the communication through truncated servers, and if you do not have a P2P entry over there, no, it's not a question of intelligence failure anymore, it's an intractable situation. The other thing is, of course, online radicalization, which we are all aware of and we keep talking about. Now, as regards online radicalization, I am glad to see that Google has taken some steps, albeit very late, about taking down the various talks and YouTube feeds of Anwar al-Awlaki, who has inspired terrorists from before 9/11 to now. We also find that there are algorithms, like for instance, one that has been brought out by Farid Hani from the University of Connecticut, in which he has used the same algorithm that is used for child pornography. As soon as there is any terrorist content, it is removed. But, ladies and gentlemen, it's a question of one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, and the definition of terrorism is not universally accepted, and violence alone is not accepted as adequate to remove material, which we have seen is causing great problems in places like Kashmir. We would always like to say that this kind of radicalization creates eddy currents within itself. We want to say that, you see, when what Pakistan is trying to do in Kashmir, in giving a narrative, a weaponized narrative, which is sometimes very far from the truth, which is sometimes not in keeping with what the people want, but there is brainwashing over a period of time. Now, with this kind of brainwashing, we are scared about what can happen in Kashmir, given the fact that there is a backflow of terrorists. I would like you all, ladies and gentlemen, to remember that in the case of Chechnya, Ibn Khattab or Dudayev or any of the earlier jihadis, they spoke about a republic of Ichkeria. They did not ever speak about an Islamic state. But today, with continual radicalization, what has happened is the concept of Ichkeria has gone, which of course has been stamped down by the Russians, and we talk about a Vilayat Kavkaz, Emirate Kavkaz and whatnot, which is a very, very dangerous portent. We are saying the same kind of problems that are there in Afghanistan, where if these matters are ignored, then we are allowing people to use the theological validation that is there, which they claim is there in the Quran. They use specifically, they cherry pick statements and they use, and that is being pushed through the internet over and over again. And of course, as I said, on grounds of internet freedom, we are unable to do very much about it. Now, this leads to the very thorny question of how much of independent freedom is there going to be, and how much of it is going to be trammeled by calls for national security. This is a conundrum which most countries have not been able to solve, because greater security would require more invasive surveillance. Are people willing to do that? And how far can we go? And how far can we go in terms of net freedom, in terms of our communication? This is something that it's a work in progress. It's going on, and yes, it is a very difficult choice that governments have to take on this matter. On a very tactical front, we need to have CCTVs with AI, with artificial intelligence, and this is, I think, an absolute need. Artificial intelligence, which is going to give us a notice within a few seconds. Our relay time has to be very quick. If this is so, we can perhaps preempt a number of attacks. Otherwise, the physical relay time in a country like India, in most countries for that matter, is going to be half an hour or so, which can lead to a number of loss of life and loss of property. So the other matter is, of course, drones with 3D capabilities, which India is looking at, but we have not yet finalized upon. Something which would be able to fly over an area, find out if there is a chemical composition change in the soil, which would immediately give an idea of whether there is a bomb, or whether there is a tunnel being dug, or if there is human movement and so on. These matters are there. There's a lot of technical support which needs to be given for intelligence, but ultimately the bottom line is human intelligence is very important, and for this we need to have excellent communication with the community. Now, we have seen in Telangana, and I'm sure Professor Owaisi would agree with this, that there is a lot of give and take between the Muslim community and the police, and this has led to a lot of successes in this region. This is a model that they have actually formulated, which we have suggested. It's a template that we followed in the rest of India. With a large Muslim population, we can rightfully pat ourselves on the back that despite our problems, despite what many people talk about, polarization and otherwise, we have actually had much less problems than most of other countries. And I think to a large extent it is because of the Islamic people in our country being very much more attuned to assimilative religion. And we need to talk about how we can work on this, because ultimately the best bulwark against terrorism is the community itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, Shri Shashank, distinguished panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is to the credit of Aditya Tikku, who can bring us all together on a Sunday morning here. He can be most persuasive. Many of us, we said, declined to attend on a Sunday. But Aditya can be very troublesome. Okay, before coming to the military response options, we have heard some very interesting talks in the morning, and there's a necessity to recount on some reality check. Now, it sounded like a terrorist. These are being scared fast. The fact of the matter is that 2008, we gathered here on the 9th anniversary, was a very historic year. Why? Because there were 6 major events that happened on terrorism front in 2008. The last one was 26/11. It happened in Ahmedabad, it happened in Jaipur, it happened in Guwahati, it happened in Delhi, and one more, Bangalore. And all were serial attacks.
One in Kabul.
Sorry, sir? Yes, Kabul also. So, and many others could tell. So 2008, 26/11 was the last one it happened. It started in the month of May in India, and from May to November, every month there were serial attacks. Serial means there were at times 18 devices found in one area. Some blasted, some not so blasted. So 2008 was a catastrophic year. Which was the previous one? We can say go back to Parliament, 2001. Which was that previous to that? We can say 1993 when we had Mumbai blast. So when you say there is a cyclic way, and then of course there have been smaller incidents that happened in Coimbatore, it happened in Delhi again, maybe somewhere else. Those were smaller attacks. So if you say there is a cyclic action, we are in that cycle which comes back to a time when we should be expecting one more. I'm saying just a cyclic way, 93, 2001, 2008, maybe 17 or 18. I'm sure Alok Bansal is noting down. Mrs. Rao has very kindly pointed about Pakistan today. If you see, we hadn't heard of this issue three weeks ago, what's happening in Islamabad today. The whole city is blocked. There is no entrance. You can't go to the airport. You can't go to the railway station. You can't enter. You can't even go towards Rawalpindi from Islamabad. The whole city is blocked. It's in dire straits of the city, and the army chief has come up and said, politicians, you sort it out, sort the muck. It was just because a line was added in one of the amendments being carried out in their law on elections, and it was felt as that line was blasphemy, and the whole city has been blocked. And the organizations whose names have been brought about to fore, who are blocking Islamabad, we had not heard of it 1 month ago. So they are being raised every day, and they are saying, okay, he takes allegiance to so-and-so event which happened 5 years ago, so the new organization has come up. So what is happening? And at the same time, they released Hafiz Saeed, and he has been very kind to speak some very nice remarks about us in the course of last 3 days. All is happening. And of course, they have no governance. They haven't had governance for 70 years, but they have no governance today. Because the governance is done by the state, which is the army. So the fact of the matter is that if events are coming to the head, well, events could be coming to the head. This is the right time to take it on. There is a new era of terrorism. As has been rightly pointed out, this terrorism of 2017, 18, 19, 20 is not the terrorism of yesteryears. It is not simply a question of blasting. And let me bring to one study which came out recently, which are the countries which were maximum targeted by terrorism in 2016. India is the third largest country hit by terrorism in 2016. The largest being Iraq, of course, 2,965 attacks. Afghanistan, of course, they lead us by 1340, and India has 927. Pakistan is 737, followed by Philippines and Nigeria. So we are third highest, a dubious claim. We have that many attacks in 1 year in 2016. All were not in J&K. J&K is only 19%. They come to Chhattisgarh, Manipur, Jharkhand, all over the place. So we are, if you say we are not in a state of some kind of anxiety, we should be. If you have 927 attacks of various kinds which have been brought into the ambit of terrorism in 1 year. There is globalization of terrorism. Mr. Rao has rightly pointed out there is a dark and deep web which most of us can't even access. We don't know that it exists. There is a net under a net. There's an internet under an internet which is non-accessible to many professionals of IT, which moves the entire system behind us. And I'm sure we are working at it, but as a professional in the military, I retired recently, I do not know, I'm not very sure we are working on the dark web. As to finding out what is being flown on the dark web from one place to another, what messages are being passed, what financial transactions are taking place, and many other issues which are happening on dark web, we do not know. If there are surreptitiously produced videos which excite populations to take action, well, we do not know about it, and they must be breaching. And I hope we are serious about the dark web. The open web we follow. We say what Zakir Musa is saying, and we catch it on and we catch him. But what is happening on dark web is not publicized. It will come to light when somebody else is caught in future. Then there are global terrorists. It is franchised. It is McDonaldization of terrorism. Al-Qaeda in southern Arabian Peninsula, Al-Qaeda in South Asia, Al-Qaeda in Maghreb, Al-Qaeda. So Al-Qaeda has got franchise. They have let it out. It is loose controlled organizations with dubious centralization. So that means is that it is all spread out. If Jamaat ul-Dawa says that they have established refugee camps and they provide food to ISIS in Syria. It is cross connection of these organizations that has taken place globally. Which is the organization we are fighting? God alone knows which organization is fighting. All are interconnected together. And all are passing similar. There was a news item about ISIS connection with Jeremiah Islamia, which is located in Indonesia, or Abu Sayyaf group. You know, who is connected to which organization and which form is unknown. And all are not, I'm not saying all are Islamic organizations. There was the Guwahati blast took place in NDFB, which were also linked to some other organization somewhere else. So there is an interconnectedness about terrorism in the world. And of course there is financial oxygen to it. I come back to Mother Earth. We have a conventional superiority. We all know, especially on the Western front, we do have a conventional superiority. We have the expertise to do this. That conventional superiority, and I make a strong statement here, has not facilitated any great deterrence on our part to make sure that the Western neighbor is kept under check on sponsoring terrorism. So the importance of conventional deterrence vis-a-vis what is carried out in sponsoring terrorism in India are two isolated facts and isolated issues. And we have a soft state. If the Minister of State states in the Parliament last year that there are 15,000 Pakistanis who came by official means with visa in India and have not gone back. They are in India. They all came. You know, and you come to India is not simple for a Pakistani. He comes how? He comes thanks to an elaborate system of checks. There's a 2012 protocol which brings about how the visas are obtained in Pakistan. He comes to India and refuses to go back. He is a sleeper. He may not be a sleeper. He may have stayed back because his cousin passed away in India. But he hasn't gone back for years. 2012 figures, 13 figures, 14 figures, 15 figures. Placed in the Parliament in relationship to a question asked. So there are, why do you have to come through the LOC? Why should you come through the LOC and fight across? You can come with a visa and bury yourself in Indian continent and say you're available tomorrow. They say people-to-people contact help. Great, you know, the theology of relationships, economic interdependence. 105 kgs of heroin found in one transaction last year in a cement being carried from Pakistan to India. One transaction. And that is one caught, which means the train which brings cement from Pakistan to India has also got many other bags which are unchecked, which are brought into India, and the receiving agents in India who absorb these drugs which are brought through open trade. I mean, are we being soft? You know, see, people-to-people contact is important. Even if 15,000 people come and settle in India without a thing, and trade is very important with us, even if the trade brings in drugs of any umpteen amount of quantity. How is got to be tackled? See, has something changed from 2008? General Philip in the morning had mentioned many things have changed in 2008, and many things have certainly changed. We have brightened up. There is an NIA which got established. It's functional, fantastic work being done by NIA on checking that oxygen called finance. Very important issue. If you check the finance in various forms, see, we who have been combating it knows that you kill a brigadier, you get this much of money deposited into your family's account in Pakistan. He doesn't even have to change currency. Every man, every person has got a finance amount laid down which is given to the terrorist family immediately after an action takes place. This is all chronicled and written on in open media. So there is a matter into this. So any amount of checks on finance that can be brought into bear is very important. Second, int has improved. You see 2017 and the coordination has improved. 2017, if we have killed 180 terrorists in J&K alone, we rest assured there have been no mass operations being carried out. It is not what we fought through in 1991, 92, 96. that first 6 years of insurgency where there were mass actions being carried out. It is now focused, targeted, well informed, and exactly taken it. That information comes to the army, we have our own grids of it, but it actually emanates from the int agencies and from the police. The grassroots SHO who says, that house, so-and-so date, so-and-so time, we will find 6 people. And they find 6 people, yes. So there is movement here, sir. So there is, have we done hardening of targets? Okay, we have done some work on hardening of targets. If you say every vehicle is a bomb, well, okay, that's one issue which we have done. We have hardened some targets, but India is such a large country, every place is a target. You can't harden all targets. There is a dynamic character to changing of military employment of military force. We have over a long time changed substantially in our operations here. Focused use of firepower, as I mentioned. Preventive measures of the kind which cause damage and human rights violations to public at large have been removed from the ambit of operations, which is a substantial change from what we were doing in 90s. We make sure that the population is not being brought to harm. There is a grid, there is a fence here. What is the future of military operations? We did a surgical strike, okay, so more than a year ago. That's one. Maybe in time, as time passes, we have to consider taking some more bolder measures or some more measures of a kind which are not closer to the borders and somewhere in the depth. You know, a quiver is full of large number of arrows and large number of issues can be taken. The fact of the matter is that the best weapon that we need to utilize today for combating terrorism is information warfare, and that's where I think there are weaknesses. Serious weaknesses are for us to use psychological propaganda and information warfare in various forms to take on. And maybe in future we should think about armed drones. We don't have any. We don't have plans to acquire any, but I think that may be one of the measures in future where we can take on targeted operations in future. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, General Sharma. I think this you have identified several new changes which have occurred in terrorism over the last few years, and these have to be countered through innovative thinking. Simi Anderson has been governing India for some time, and I'm sure that she would have some interesting aspects about human rights and terrorism.
Thank you, Sri Shashank, Aditya, His Excellency, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen in the audience. I'm pleased to be invited to share my views on today's session topic of global response to terrorism from the perspective of a human rights organization. Today I join prominent speakers and leaders who take the podium at this GCTC conference to call for a global response to terrorism, both by combating it and taking early action, joint action by the international community in the fight against violent extremism is crucial. A global response calls for close cooperation of governments, law enforcement and regional organizations. The United Nations is the best platform to manage and coordinate international efforts. In my capacity as the Director International of the organization, we work with the United Nations. We are not generally activists. We do development work, we work with refugees, and we are always there to lend a helping hand to the victims of terrorism. At the outset, I would like to reaffirm that acts, methods, and practices of terrorism in all its forms and manifestations are activities aimed at the destruction of human rights, fundamental freedoms, and democracy, threatening territorial integrity, security of states, and destabilizing legitimately constituted governments, and that the international community should take the necessary steps to enhance cooperation to prevent and combat terrorism. I also reaffirm that terrorism cannot and should not be associated with any religion, nationality, civilization, or ethnic group. The international community has called upon the United Nations Security Council, and especially its permanent members, to overcome divisions and find a way to deal more effectively with the worsening refugee situation, in line with its primary responsibility for maintenance of international peace and security. The magnitude of the current humanitarian crisis needs a determined and immediate response from the entire international community based on common principles of solidarity, humanity, and shared responsibility. There is a call for a global solidarity in the face of the refugee crisis. Prompt global response and cooperation is crucial to preempt the plight which has seen hundreds and thousands of refugees flooding to the doorsteps of various countries. The current situation is now also a global crisis of responsibility. The United Nations system and all leaders of the world need to come together to ensure that those fleeing war and repression are treated in a safe, orderly, and dignified manner. We are confronted with unspeakable barbarism and terror, with the most appalling forms of murder, sexual violence against women and girls, and other most heinous crimes against humanity, culture, religion, dignity, and against, dearest of all, human life. It is shocking and inexcusable. We should help these people in need and support assistance to countries hosting large number of refugees. Too often we have to deal with the consequences of our inaction. Too often, instead of solving problems at their source and addressing root causes in their early stages, we spend more time and resources on the crisis that we have allowed to spin out of control. We must change this approach. We must act on time with determination and adequate resources. The migrant crisis that has overflooded many European states is a textbook example of the consequences of inaction. The price is just too high. While noting that the solution to the crisis is an issue of defense against terrorism and extremism in all its forms that must be prevented and defeated at its core, we call for full mobilization of efforts to counter terrorism and all forms of intolerance and indiscrimination. Bringing into perspective a regional response, we see media and reporting playing an extremely significant role. A hallmark of good human rights reporting has been its detailed description of individual incidents and its commitment to give names and faces to victims. Human rights organizations have often provided victims or their families with an opportunity to tell their stories, and most human rights researchers, reporters, and advocates can relate anecdotes of meetings with families who knew the chances of finding a disappeared relative with virtual non-existence, yet remained eager to say what has happened to them. To the extent that advocates can highlight the personal losses that terrorism as well as counter-terrorism causes, it will also help individuals across society to identify with the values and principles of human rights. Such reporting certainly draws attention and gives dignity to the needs and rights of victims and survivors. It also permits empathy. A number of human rights organizations have done valuable work monitoring and drawing attention to discrimination in Europe, Asia, and the United States, clearly taking up such issues alongside efforts to highlight the claims of victims helps to demonstrate the even-handed character of human rights organizations and their willingness to support claims by all individuals whose right and whose security are threatened by political terrorism. Extreme violence and terrorism have created a variety of challenges and dilemmas for human rights advocates. Recent events has triggered a profound and often disturbing debate about how societies and governments should respond to terrorist attacks while respecting human rights and the rules of law. We have researched in depth whether recently politically motivated violence and terrorism have changed in the nature and are the legal tools available for discussing acts of terrorism. We can examine criticisms that are sometimes made of the position that human rights advocates take when they address this subject and suggested some additional arguments that they might use. No single approach is likely to suit the needs of all the advocates who confront the task of dealing with the victims and perpetrators of the act of terror. There are likely to be variations from country to country, and significant differences between national and international organizations. First of all, the organizations need to recognize that both the threat of terrorism and public perception of that threat are real. The fear has become so great in societies that public support for state action and intolerance of state abuse have both risen, sharply narrowing the space in which human rights organizations operate. It is vital to reassert the importance of the core mission of human rights organizations to rigorously monitor the activities of countries and to ensure they respect and protect human rights. Even basic principles banning torture and inhumane treatment or protecting the right not to be arbitrarily detained can no longer be taken for granted. Human rights groups should therefore continue to focus on global responses and in particular on the protection of the basic rights. It can be suggested here that human rights organizations could broaden their monitoring to include a closer examination of collateral damages inflicted by state actors. At the international level, human advocates should continually engage with debates about terrorism. International law is today shifting its focus. States are no longer the sole subjects of international law, and human rights obligations apply not only to state but also to some degree to non-state actors. So what are the choices for these organizations? They have begun to adopt their resources, a victim-centered approach, and focus on the impact that terrorist attacks and counter-terrorist attacks have on people and communities. In parallel, the interactions suggest that human rights groups should continue to develop and apply their monitoring skills. They would imply providing factually precise analysis of the impact of the terrorist violence on victims. This is by no means a simple task, and it may not be appropriate for all organizations to pursue it. Complex questions are likely to arise regarding selection, allocation of resources, security, and presentations. I would say that human rights NGOs, activists, and other actors engaged in the promotion of human rights may suffer today from a certain degree of legitimacy gap. Because this gap represents a genuine dilemma, there is no easy solution to it. Rather, the groups need to accept that in addition to campaigning for their cause, they should consider the public's perception of their work and priorities. Social media in reporting plays a significant role in the responses towards terrorism. Our reactions to terrorist attacks, our social media reactions are predictive, they are harmful. We have all become part of terror. We don't even realize it, but we all do the same thing every time there is an attack in place. We have developed our own social media mourning ritual. There is an oversaturation of information with the added clutter of politics and religion, which plays straight into the hands of terrorism. It shows how divided society is, creating a generalization of minorities. As long as there are headlines saying terrorists pose a threat to democracy, we are doing the terrorist work for them. We should start avoiding using language like terrorism is a threat to democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, a global response for close cooperation between the media, public, governments, law enforcement, regional organizations, and human rights groups is mandatory and very much in need. Joint action by the international community in the fight against violent extremism is called for the day. We do not follow any other religion, just the religion of humanity. And once again, in conclusion, I thank Mr. Shashank and GCTC for giving us this opportunity to share our views. Many thanks.
I think this has been a very important contribution, that the human rights have to be kept in mind always, and that itself may lead to a better climate for better interaction among the human beings belonging to different societies, minority groups, majority groups, and all that. Well, I've got a message from the organizers that because we started late, they have given us 15 minutes very kindly extra. So lunch would be 1:45. So I would still request that we need to give some time to the people who may question, and we have all come prepared to listen to interact with the audience. So I would therefore request Professor Rajesh Rajgopalan and Professor Alok Bansal to keep to the original time limit of 8 minutes each, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Shashank, and Aditya also, GCTC, for inviting me here to speak on international cooperation on counterterrorism. I'll try and keep it limited. I don't have a whole lot to say. Basically, when we look at international cooperation, all the talk about terrorism being a global problem and how terrorism's response to terrorism also has to be a global response in which countries cooperate. I think that is well and good as far as public rhetoric goes. But we know that there is no such thing as a global response to terrorism. Much of terrorism remains essentially a national problem for all countries. And there are good reasons why we should be skeptical about any kind of international cooperation when it comes to dealing with terrorism. I'm not saying that just to be contrarian. I'm saying that is because that is a reality, and we need to recognize that reality so that we do not overemphasize what international cooperation can do in terms of dealing with, in terms of helping us deal with our problem of terrorism. Because ultimately, dealing with terrorism is a problem that each country has to deal with on its own. We have plenty of efforts at the UN, for example, Hafiz Syed, putting Hafiz Syed on the UN terror watch list, and we try to get the United States to declare Pakistan a terror state, and so on and so forth. And we get angry or disappointed when these sorts of measures do not succeed. But the point is that even if these measures do succeed, even if you manage to put Hafiz Syed on the UN terror watch list or get Pakistan declared a terror state, that's not going to help us very much in terms of actually solving our terror problem. But there is also an important reason as to why these things are difficult to get done. As we know, the UN cannot even agree. The 200 countries or members of the United Nations can't even agree on a definition of terrorism. So if you can't even agree on how to define terrorism, how are you going to fight it together? And the reason they can't agree on how to define terrorism is also fairly simple, because as it's kind of a cliche to say that someone's terrorist is another one's freedom fighter. But that is also the reality, in the sense that not so much the freedom fighter part, but the fact that all countries ultimately pursue their own national interests, and that these national interests periodically do not coincide with the national interests of other countries. I mean, these are cliches, but the point is that we sometimes forget these when we expect international cooperation when it comes to fighting terrorism. And it is as true of us, of the policies that we pursue, as it is of others when they pursue policies that impact on us. For example, for all the talk that for all the sort of efforts that we put into getting others to cooperate with us on Pakistan-sponsored terrorism, we do not characterize Hezbollah or the Hamas as terrorist groups, despite the fact that Hezbollah and Hamas repeatedly target one of our closest friends in the Middle East, Israel. And the reason we do not do that is because obviously it doesn't help us in any great way. It doesn't serve our interest in sort of classifying these groups as terrorist groups. So in a sense, ultimately Israel has to fight its own fight, and India has to fight its own fight, and we should not expect too much when it comes to expecting that international cooperation will somehow solve our problem of terrorism. That doesn't mean that there is no international cooperation possible at all. Obviously, there is some level of cooperation that is possible. But we need to understand what the limits of that cooperation are and what we can expect from that cooperation. One of the most significant areas of cooperation is, of course, in terms of intelligence cooperation. Obviously, states, especially if you have good political relationships, if you see eye to eye on a number of global strategic issues, then it is possible that you can expect some level of international intelligence cooperation that could marginally improve your capacity to deal with terrorism in your own country. But even that is limited because ultimately the focus of intelligence agencies is on threats facing their country. And even when we look at even when the intelligences look at the threats facing their own countries, every intelligence agency has, one of the earlier speakers mentioned, every intelligence agency has its own problems. It has problems of coordination within itself. It has problems of pulling together information from a variety of sources and so on and so forth, and that makes it difficult even for intelligence agencies to deal with terror threats against themselves. For example, 9/11, it was not that the United States, maybe the dozens of US intelligence agencies did not know in bits and pieces the plot that was taking place. But the problem was that they could see that whole picture only after the operation took place, when they went back and examined what bits of information they had. And the same thing, of course, was true of 26/11, because we had bits and pieces of information from different agencies and whatnot. So in a sense, even when you're dealing with threats to your own nation, it is difficult for intelligence agencies to sort of bring together all the information they have in order to deal with terrorism properly. That makes it even more difficult when you talk about international cooperation, because we just saw the last few days a massive terror attack in the Sinai, and that attack, this was something that the Egyptian intelligence agencies would have been primarily focused on, not Indian intelligence agencies or Israeli intelligence agencies or the United States or anything like that. So in a sense, the level of intelligence cooperation even at the international level is likely to be somewhat limited because of the fact that intelligence agencies focus on different targets, and they do not focus. The US intelligence agencies are not primarily focused on dealing with elite. One of the reasons for this is that ultimately terrorist groups, by and large, there are Al-Qaeda and ISIS are exceptions, but by and large terrorist groups have specific local interests and they have specific local targets. The LET does not by and large, or JEM does not by and large focus on the United States or on Europe or other targets. Their primary focus is on India, and therefore because they do not focus on Europe or the US or anybody else, those intelligence agencies are not likely to focus on dealing with the threat from LET or JEM. So in a sense, when you talk about these sorts of cooperation, especially at the intelligence level, we'll have to be careful about how much such intelligence cooperation can provide in terms of helping us fight terror. There are other areas of cooperation. We again talked about drones and equipment and tactics and so on and so forth, and that definitely is an area where international cooperation can help. Counterterrorism, joint training with counterterrorism, and so on and so forth can help in terms of dealing with increasing your capacity, enhancing your the capacity of your counter-terror forces, sharing best practices, joint training. All of those things can help, but one has to be somewhat those go some way towards enhancing your counter-terror capacities. But again, that doesn't entirely resolve your problem. To come to, I was asked to specifically talk about the Quad, which is kind of sort of the last few weeks, there's been a lot of talk about the Quad, which is an alliance between the United States, India, Japan, and Australia. But the Quad by itself does not really have much to do with terrorism. The primary focus, the Quad is essentially a nascent sort of military alliance that deals with a potential threat that's emerging from China. But all alliances are focused on one single threat, and that is true for alliances that has been true for alliances throughout history. Alliances can't deal with two such threats, in the sense of threats from all directions. It can only deal with one particular threat. And the Quad, considering the kind of countries that are in the Quad, are primarily focused on dealing with China. So in a sense, to expect that the Quad can do something about dealing with the threat from Pakistan-based terrorism or Pakistan-sponsored terrorism would be somewhat foolish on our part. But the problem is that all the time when you talk about closer relationship with the United States or some other country, the litmus test always seems to be, will you condemn terrorism from Pakistan, or will you do help on terrorism from Pakistan? What did you do about terrorism from Pakistan? And I think that's a wrong sort of question to ask, because these arrangements, these alliances, these partnerships have different purposes. And we can't hold everything to that litmus test of what happens in terms of terrorism from Pakistan. Several previous speakers, General Rakesh and Dr. Prabha, all talked about the fact that all talked about different aspects of that terror of how to deal with terrorism from the military side, from the intelligence side. All of those are domestic. I mean, we need to sort of enhance our capabilities both at the domestic level in terms of enhancing our intelligence, enhancing our military capabilities, and others can help. The Quad countries can help. I mean, Australia or the United States and others would possibly be able to help in terms of enhancing those capabilities. But expecting those countries to be able to deal with our problem, I think is foolish. We need to be able to resolve this problem on our own, and nobody else is going to come to our assistance to do that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think I stand between you and your lunch. The last speaker in this long list of enlightened souls, I really hardly know anything. I think the good point is that the collective sum of wisdom that's been imparted to you leave nothing for me to speak. But since Aditya has managed to get me on a Sunday morning, I ought to say my 8 minutes worth of it. The subject that I've chosen to speak is theological underpinnings of terror and pathways of de-radicalization. On 21st August of this year, that's just slightly more than 3 months before this, Abu Yusuf al-Hindi died fighting PKK apostates. This is a statement which came out from Daesh, Islamic State. Now, Abu Yusuf al-Hindi hails from Bhatkal. He was one of the first Indians to be designated as specially designated global terrorist by the United States. See, we don't have ostriches in our country, so we behave like ones. For long we said that we are not affected by radicalization, we have no terrorists. Till Arif Majid ran away from his home in Kalyan and told the world that I am going to Islamic State, leaving his parents. His letter, for those who have not read, is worth reading, where he said he cried seeing his parents commit sin, day in and day out. He said, I saw you mixing with opposite sexes, looking at the idiot box called television. The first Indian to die fighting for Daesh was from our Honorable MP's constituency, Muhammad Hanif Wasim, who embraced so-called martyrdom on 5th May 2015. He was a B.Tech from Hyderabad, a master's from London, working in Dubai. Now, why I am trying to tell you all this is because there is an attempt in this country to rationalize terrorism. People try and talk about deprivation, alienation. Was there any deprivation? Was there an alienation? Muhammad Hanif Wasim's father is a real estate magnate. No pressing commitment for him to go and die. Arif Majid, when he went to Iraq, he had not even stepped outside Maharashtra, leave aside outside India. So what is it that is drawing an individual to go and fight in the forgotten lands of Iraq, Syria, or those desert sands of Middle East? And herein comes the catch. Right or wrong, the terrorist outfits have succeeded in churning out a theological narrative. Now this theological narrative draws youth. I'm not trying to say how true it is, how false it is, but it is that narrative which draws Muhammad Wasim, which draws Arif Majid from the close confines of their homes to the battlegrounds of Syria, Iraq, and other such places. And if we have to counter this terrorist, if we have to kill these terrorists, this terrorism cannot be countered by bombs or bullets. Please understand this very categorically. This is a battle for the brains. And you have to come out with a counter narrative. A de-radicalization which is based on a counter narrative can only work. Unless, of course, you can de-radicalize a youth, killing them, eliminating them can at best be a temporary solution. New recruits will be created. We have to counter them. Now, how do we counter them? That's a very important issue. I taught for 3 years in Jamia Millia Islamia. And most of my students would come and tell me, sir, you know Islam better than us. The fact is, one unique characteristic of a terrorist is that he is sure of himself. I have a good friend called Aisha Siddiqa, a very famous Pakistani author. She once sent me a YouTube video. This was a YouTube video of a 15-year-old, maybe 16, whose suicide waste failed to explode. And he is in a jail, and a journalist goes and interviews him. Now, this was, of course, in Urdu. For the sake of this audience, I have translated. The question the journalist asked that suicide bomber is, if you are let go, what will you do? He says, immediately, I'll go back and do the same thing. He has not even an iota of doubt. He's that confident. She says, what is the advantage? There are people who have done no harm to you. He says, this is a jihad in which either you are with us or you are against us. He says, there could be your walid, your brother, your sister. He says, in jihad, there is no walid, there is no brother, there is no sister. It's either with you or... She says, there are clerics who have said that this suicide bombing is un-Islamic. He says, they are all sarkari. They are all government-appointed clerics. We have clerics who justify this. So, of course, I'm not trying to say that he could answer everything. There was a question on which he got foxed. That is when she said that there will be toddlers there. Now, these toddlers cannot think for themselves. They cannot take their own actions. What is their fault? He had no answer. So what I'm trying to say is that you have to counter him theologically on the basis of narrative. And here, the most important factor is that more radical in ideology, lesser is the tolerance for ambiguity. You can say Marxism, you can see radical Islam everywhere. Even slight difference, people are ready to find. Today in the cyber world, you will find there's a big debate going on between Wahhabis and Deobandis as to how to do wudu. Such a minuscule thing, but there's a huge amount of pages and pages which have been written. Who is right, who is wrong? Now, if people are taught the history of Islam, and if you can create even 1% doubt in a terrorist's mind that what he is doing may not be right, he would not be a terrorist. And please, ladies and gentlemen, I am not an authority, I am not a theologist, but you would appreciate that Islam has never been a monolith from the time Holy Prophet was on his deathbed. Because if you go through the Shia hadith, they say he asked for an ink and paper. The first fitna which happened, which is often talked of in English as Battle of Camels, Hazrat Ali was fighting Hazrat Aisha with sahibas on both sides. Who was right? Can anybody give me a categorical, rightful answer? Symbolism is again very important in Islam. In second fitna or the Battle of Siffin, Muawiyah's armies came with parchments from Holy Quran on the lancers, and somebody as revered as Hazrat Ali had to negotiate. But have we studied Islam? In 833 AD, Abbasid Caliph Al-Mamun introduced Mihna. He ruled that the Holy Quran is created and needs to be interpreted in light of contemporary developments. And anybody who disagreed was put into the dungeons. Not only him, 2 successive caliphs followed it. It's only during Al-Mutwakil's time that this was countered. There was a time when Carnations took over Holy Kaaba stone from Makkah to Bahrain, saying that going for Hajj is a superstition. I'm not trying to say that these are right. But why this is important is that every individual must know that there were different thoughts at different times. If that individual knows that there were different thoughts at different times, he would not be so certain about what he's doing. Because any terrorist who is going and killing himself believes in a particular hadith, believes in a particular narrative that has been given to him, which believes that he will go straight to heaven. I was giving you that Aisha Siddiqa's YouTube video. That lady asks him, the lady journalist asks him, have you never thought in terms of nikah? He says, why waste my life on one when there are 72 waiting in heaven? But this is exactly the verbatim. I'm giving you the verbatim. I wish I could give you that YouTube video. You could have seen that boy. He would not be more than 50. And this is the level of motivation. This is the level of brainwashing that has gone. So this is what is very important. I think I could speak on this subject for an hour plus, but the time limitations are there. I was given 8 minutes and I think I finished 8 minutes. So I would like to wind up. But what I'm trying to say is that if you have to counter radicalization, you have to come out with a narrative. You have to come out with a counter narrative which can only be created if you understand theology. You cannot create that counter narrative if you don't understand theology. And the tools have to be media and curriculum. If you can create a carefully crafted de-radicalization campaign, you have to do it. Please remember, why is Ayman al-Zawahiri holed up in Afghanistan, Pakistan and not fighting in Yemen, Libya or Egypt? There is no dearth of recruits in those parts of the world where he hails from. It is because of a belief in a hadith which says that end of time battle will be fought in Khorasan. And Khorasan, according to Islamic lexicon, is this part of the world. They believe they are fighting Dajjal or the Antichrist, which is represented by the United States. Unless, of course, we understand the theological background of these terrorists, I'm afraid we're confusing. We are really not targeting what we need to target. And unless, of course, we know this, we will not be able to. Thank you. I have a lot to say, but I think that's all.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Bansal. You have given a completely innovative explanation of what is going on. So what General Sharma had mentioned, that terrorism is having new faces, now we have come to realize what is going on at present and why we are thinking of going back to the Prophet's times for pure thing. But that is only one part of it. There is other terrorist incidents also, not just relating to Islam. So therefore, one has to take into account the other aspects also. And all the participants, all the panelists have given excellent ideas from different aspects. Now the floor is open. We have, let's say, about 10 minutes of interaction and then we'll be ready. Yeah, I think I find this. And
allow me to do that. And I was waiting for Professor Bansal what he said. In fact, I was missing in Dr. Rao did refer to the ideological aspect of terrorism. Professor Bansal made it so open. Now, first of all, I want to make it clear, when we talk about the ideological moorings of terrorism, we're not talking to faith. We're not talking about faith. It's none of anybody's business to question anybody's faith. So if we talk about Islam, Muslim, here in this conversation, we're not talking about faith. We have to respect the faith the way we respect every faith. So please, that's a disclaimer. Now, we need to understand what drives a person to kill and get killed and also derive spiritual ecstasy out of it. That's the ideological moorings we should be talking about. And then we say, always tend to pat ourselves that India is the second, third largest Muslim population in the world, so we have not produced so many terrorists. I think we are slightly mistaken. India's contribution to the Islamic Jihad is Pakistan. 14th of August 1947, millions of India-born Indians created Pakistan. And today Pakistan is a hub, it's the epicenter of global terrorism. Let's not ignore that. And 30 years Kashmir Jihad is bleeding India. 30 years. And in the context of India, whenever we talk of counter-terrorism, I think we are also referring to, we are only referring to Kashmir. If 26/11 happened in Mumbai, the roots and the connection was related to Kashmir. So let's not forget that. And also, Ma'am Anderson, human rights groups in Kashmir, those who operated in the 90s, were only talking about the rights of the perpetrators of Kashmiri Hindu genocide. And no wonder those who deserve to be tried for crimes against humanity, those terrorists, are today acknowledged as stakeholders of Kashmir, stakeholders within the Indian state. Then, Excellency, Ambassador Abdali, it's so nice to hear you. You refer to the Taliban taking over Afghanistan in the 90s. Why I'm talking about Afghanistan? Because we see a Pak region is connected to the Kashmir. When Taliban overran Kabul in the 90s, what Jamaat-e-Islamiyah Pakistan gave a slogan across Pakistan. It reverberated in the mosques of Kashmir. हम जश्न काबुल मना चुके, चलो अब कश्मीर चले. That's how I related with it. And the lull that we have all seen in Afpak area, it was a strategic lull because the protagonists were shifted to Middle East. Now that we all know IS is shrinking in Middle East, they're going to come back to Afpak, and their destination is going to be Kashmir, which I regard as the Himalayan end of Islamist arc that rises from Middle East, where Afak it goes to Kashmir. So please don't ignore. And we talked about IS, Daesh, everything else. Recent recruits for Daesh we are talking about, but don't forget, Glasgow airport blast was done by a Bangalorean-born Kafir. He was an aerospace scientist. He went all the way from Bangalore to blow himself up at Glasgow airport. You know what the target were? Children going for excursion. And then, in 2000, Birmingham-born Bilal Ahmed, he had never been to India. He can
We have to be short, please.
It's related to global terrorism. I think we need to talk about it in Indian context. This Bilal Ahmed, Birmingham-born, he came all the way from Birmingham to blow himself up in Srinagar in 2000. It was possibly one of the first Fidayeen attacks in this part of the world, and we never took cognizance of that. My plea is my appeal from this platform that should go to the policy makers. Don't ignore what awaits India and Kashmir. It's going to be not so good, despite your successes there. Please don't treat it as a political problem. Jihad is a military problem, deserves military attention, and of course, de-radicalization that we talked about is very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think this is really once again, fine-tuning the dimensions which we have been talking about so that the final report which will go, there are 2 more sessions that should really, whenever you want to share it with the government and other authorities and NGOs, it should go clearly what are the various aspects. Any query at this time, or we have another couple of minutes? Yes, sir. At the back.
Is combating terrorism considered a human right?
Yes.
So whose right do you put first? The guy who's attacked or the guy who's attacking?
The guy who's a?
The guy who's a victim or the guy who's a terrorist? Whose human right comes first?
A terrorist has gone beyond the realm of human rights.
But I don't know what it stands for. As far as terrorism is concerned, I totally agree with what Madam has said, that we'll have to strengthen our counter-terrorism measures. We'll have to be more... also, Mr. Bansal said about understanding the theological argument of these all terrorists. And may I also correct Mr. Bansal, it's not Khorasan, it is a place called in Syria, where there is a masjid. The hadith of the Prophet says that there's a masjid, and behind that masjid, that is where it happens. So that is why, So, I think we have to strengthen our counter-terrorism measures. That is most important. And then we must have a de-radicalization program, and it should not be publicized. I come from a city and state wherein we are seeing little bit of success. And that is why you see that when this video was released, which was released by Yusuf al-Hindi and Shafi Parmar, in that video they had shown 3 important Muslim leaders. One was myself, Mahmood Madni, and another MP from Assam, Badruddin Ajmal, and we were shown as supporting the Taghut, that is supporting the idol worshippers. So these people have to be taken seriously, and these steps have to be taken. And lastly is that the question also should be asked that why is it that people from US, Britain, France, Belgium have gone to ISIS in large numbers, and when it comes to India, yes, even not in one should go, but to stop that, strengthen your counter-terrorism measures, have more Arabic speaking people and bring scholars like Sheikh Muhammad al-Yaqubi, who's doing an extensive work on the de-radicalization and how to stop ISIS in a theological way.
Thank you very much, Owaisi sir. I think after this we need to think it over, whatever points have been said, and we can have more queries in the next sessions. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, Ambassador.
Just very small experience of my own to share with you. I fully agree with Mr. Alok earlier when he described in the ideological context how terrorism works. There are a number of factors involved. One is of course, the ideology, how youngsters and elements are brainwashed. As per my own experience, when I was the deputy NSA, we would have people coming and explaining to us how this state machinery worked in creating people who would be ready for blowing up themselves in public or any other places. They look at the person they brainwash. If they can make one by simply argument, a narrative, they do that way to create an environment in the ideological context to make one ready. If they cannot, there are a number of other ways they're using. We in fact arrested a number of suicide bombers before they blew up themselves in Kabul. At the time of blowing up, something would go wrong. They would not be able to blow themselves up, and we found them complete unconscious. So it's not only the ideology or some narrative that they create in the minds of some individuals. It is also the scientific evolution or the science involved where they would make one by whatever means, injection, medicine, to make one of the view that one has to blow up themselves in any way that they can. So number of elements, not the ideology. I think the ideology is involved much lesser than many other methods that states are using. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Excellency. Thank you very much. Okay, the session is closed.